Hi there, Sam Medina here from the Rift Online Church. Uh, Welcome to another session of the Thursday Night Live Discipleship Teaching. And without any further ado, we're going to just get right into it. If you could turn your Bibles to Judges chapter 8. Today we're going to be discussing what I like to call the consequences and responsibilities of victory. Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for it falling on good ground. Father, thank you for giving me the tongue of the learned, that I would give your people a word in season that would be relevant and appropriate for them, that would give them some guidance and direction, and bring them to a deeper intimacy with you. In Jesus' name, amen. And we're starting at the first verse. It reads, "And the men of Ephraim said unto him, Why have you served us thus, that you called us not when you went to fight with the Midianites? And they did chide with him sharply." And this is something that we will see. This is a recurring theme in life in general. You're going to see this in your Christian walk when there's been warfare, when there's been a struggle, and you've gone through something, especially if you got a vision for the work of the ministry, and you've had to really fight to get somewhere. And when you seem to have the victory, that's when people come out of the woodwork and act like they wanted to fight with you the whole time, like they were always in your corner, like the whole time they were just raring to fight alongside you, when that really wasn't the case. Because these guys were nowhere to be found when Gideon gathered all the people on the mountain. But here they are giving him a hard time. He's down, mind you, he's still in pursuit of the enemy. And so in verse 2 he says to them, "What have I done now in comparison of you? Isn't the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer?" And people wonder why he would say something like this. Because the issue here it wasn't so much that they really wanted to fight, it's just they wanted a share of the credit. They wanted some of the glory, they wanted some of the bragging rights. And as he put it, even the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim was better than all the vintage of the region where he was from. That they were in such a position of prosperity. And I don't know if this was literal or figurative, but either way, it's a tremendous comparison. Now, if you don't know what gleaning is, it was a practice back then where you go to harvest whatever you're harvesting. And then you would only, and the law stated, you could only pass through once. Let's say you had a field of grapes. You go through your vines and you harvest your grapes. You can only pass through once. Whatever's left, the local poor people can come and they can glean. They can come and take whatever's left on there, and you don't charge them for it. It was a way of making sure that the poor at least got something. And so Gideon here's making this comparison that even the scraps of Ephraim was better than everything they had, than everything that his particular group of people over in Abiezer, wherever you pronounce it, than their whole vintage. Now, whether literal or figurative, this will give you a picture of the status of the two different groups. You guys already have status. What am I compared to you guys? And this will happen, and I've seen it happen. I've seen people in the work of the ministry, they get jealous of somebody who's coming up, they get envious. They act like they wanted to be a part of it because it's starting to be successful or it has achieved something significant. But they're still small. And I've seen this. I've seen a guy I remember years ago. I bought a little SUV. It was just a Ford Explorer. It wasn't anything particularly fancy. It did have the leather seats and power everything, all that stuff. Had all the bells and whistles. And some guy in a Range Rover was giving me a dirty look. And I didn't understand it. I'm like, this Ford Explorer is used. Your Range Rover looks new. You're in a $60,000 car. I'm in a $7,000 car. And you're giving me you're player hating on me? And the truth is, people will do that. Because for some people, what you got to understand about jealousy, and this is something you're going to have to deal with to come to a place of maturity in whether it's in spiritual warfare or just in your daily walk, is that jealousy and envy don't just happen when you have more than someone else. Sometimes they have more than you, way more than you, like the guy with the Range Rover. Sometimes jealousy occurs when you have more or you've done more than people think you should. Because sometimes in their view, you don't know your place. Delivering Israel shouldn't have gone to, some minor son of a well, his father was kind of the big dog in town, but they were a little town. They were small compared to Ephraim. So in their view, this wasn't his place. And you got to understand that part of the responsibility or the consequences of victory is you're going to have to deal with stuff like that. And the short answer for it is get over it. Because a lot of times, and I run into this all the time. People they want prayer. Or they feel like they need a word because somebody said something to them, or they found out somebody was talking about them. Like, brother, you don't know persecution. That's nothing. I wish people would just talk about me. I mean, I've had people try to run me over with their car repeatedly. Same guy again. He did it like 3 times. When he finally gave up on running me over with his car, he got out of his car, was pointing his finger at me, screaming, "You! You!" And I'm thinking, who is this guy? I've never seen him before in my life. So, people, like I said, I wish people would talk about me. That'd be nice. Um, and people do things to my car, and so on and so forth. Uh, but you're going to have to deal with this. And in verse 3, Gideon continues and he says, God has delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeeb. And what was I able to do in comparison of you? Then their anger was abated toward him when he said that. So he gave them a little credit, gave them some respect, and sometimes, in some situations, and here, they did get those people, and they dealt with them, but they wanted the main credit for having delivered Israel. Period. But he gave them some credit. And something you got to understand: if somebody was involved, even marginally, one of the things we got to learn to do, and often we don't do when we've had a victory, is that we don't give credit where it's due. And yes, people should grow beyond the need for recognition. There was an American president by the name of Calvin Coolidge who was believed to have said years ago, you'd be surprised what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And it's true. A lot of times we're so caught up in that, and that was the problem these people from Ephraim. But he gave them a little credit, and they stopped being so mad. because they at least got some bragging rights. As petty as that was, and sometimes, not that you have to give credit where it isn't due, but do take care that you don't overlook the people who were involved in the process. Because I've seen it again and again. I even have family members who are in ministry who, the people that helped them out, they forget about them. During their struggle, they remember them. They're tight. They're cool. They're, oh my goodness, this person's such a blessing. And once the struggle is over, they forgot all about them. And that's not pleasing to God. Verse 4, it says, Gideon came to Jordan and passed over, he and the 300 men that were with him, faint, yet pursuing them. Now, another thing I'd like to communicate to you tonight about the consequences and responsibility of victory is a lot of times in our spiritual warfare, we stop fighting when it looks like we won. And a lot of times, we've won to a degree, but the fight isn't done. And we stop pursuing, we stop warring, we stop praying, we stop fasting, and we start to try to enjoy the victory before the fight's really over. And at this point, Gideon and his men, they were tired, but they continued the pursuit because they understood that this enemy had to be wiped out. And we usually try to apply this to spiritual warfare. I think it's more important to apply this to the warfare that we all fight in here and in here, in our head and in our heart. Recently I saw a clip for an upcoming movie. Apparently there's another Rocky movie coming out. He's not fighting, he's training somebody. And it turns out to be Apollo Creed's long lost son. And they're standing in front of a mirror, and he's pointing at the mirror. He says, see that guy? That's the toughest opponent you'll ever face. And a lot of times we like to talk about spiritual warfare, and the truth is the toughest opponent you will ever face is the guy in the mirror. That guy's giving you more trouble than the devil ever will. Most of the time, that guy in the mirror is the reason why the devil's giving you problems in the first place. And so we do have this tendency to externalize spiritual warfare, and we make it about going after this and going after that, and we start seeing demons in every corner, and we forget that we're supposed to deal with this guy first. We're supposed to deal with that guy in the mirror first. And sometimes that fight ain't over, but we've gotten a measure or a degree of victory. And so we act like the fight is over and we start moving on. And you see this all the time in ministry. I've seen it a lot, where people still have character issues that they had not dealt with. And you have victory to a degree, but you got these inward character issues that are cropping up, and they are affecting everything you do. I mean, goodness, I know a lot of preachers, and I hate to say it, but most of the preachers I know are selfish. You're pastoring a church and you're selfish. That ought not to be. And sure enough, that selfishness always ends up affecting their ministry. Do they cast out devils? Sometimes. Do they preach good? Oh yeah, some of these guys can preach up a storm, man. They'll have you shouting and dancing in the aisles. Some of them got a good word, have genuine calling from God, but they got that selfishness that taints their motivation and affects the direction that their ministry is heading in. And it isn't until 10, 15, 20 years later that something happens and now you have a scandal, because selfishness always leads to self-indulgence. Self-indulgence is very conducive to self-absorption. And a selfish, self-absorbed, self-indulgent person is always going to get into some kind of moral trouble. There's either going to be a money scandal or there will be a sexual scandal. It cannot be avoided. It will happen. Well, the scandal itself may not happen, but there will be sin. Some people cover it up better than others. The ones who don't cover it up so well, you end up with a scandal. But some are really good at covering their tracks. But the problem is, even if they succeed in covering their tracks for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they go to their grave with those secrets intact, it's not going to be a secret on the day of judgment. That accountability is inescapable for all of us. And so now Gideon, at this point, says to the men over at Succoth, he says, "Give me, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me, because they're tired, and I'm pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." And the princes of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread unto your army?" These guys are keeping their options open. And this is another thing we have to be prepared for, because sometimes you get a degree or a measure of victory. Things are starting to move forward. And there sometimes comes a time when you need some help. But because it's not quite done, a lot of times people aren't willing to help. And especially in this situation, they weren't willing to help because they didn't know which way the fight was going to go. And we have to be prepared for that. And it can be very difficult not to resent that. Especially when you need the help, as they did. They were tired. They were hungry. They've been, at this point probably fighting all night and pursuing the enemy, and they're tired, but they got to get it done. And so Gideon says, "Therefore, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." This is not the timid Gideon of the previous chapter. And we usually, when we talk about Gideon, we focus on the other thing, the fleece and Gideon being scared. Now Gideon has manned up in a very big way. Now he's threatening people, and rightly so. At least in this particular case. And I'm not saying we should threaten people, and I've seen that in ministry too. Know one prophet who threatened some people with a curse if they didn't sign over this property to him that he wanted. And because they believed in the prophetic and they believed that the curse would come true because apparently it cursed some other people, they signed it over to him. And it's a shameful thing. And this is not what we should be doing. Now, don't get me wrong. There are situations where there are consequences to those who don't do what they're supposed to do. Because there are times when people were supposed to help. There are times where people were supposed to participate in your victory. And they didn't. And there will be consequences for them. But I would not recommend being the agent of those consequences. Just let God handle it. And sure enough, He will. One way or another. And the next verse it says, "He went up from there to Penuel and spoke to them likewise. And the men of Penuel answered him the same way the men of Succoth had answered him. Looks like Gideon can't catch a break. Everybody's trying to keep their options open. They're so scared that the battle's going to go badly that because his army's looking bad, they're looking tired. They want to keep their options open and not get in trouble for having helped out the enemies of these kings. And it says, and he spoke also to the men of Penuel, saying, when I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their hosts with them, about 15,000 men, all that were left of the hosts of the children of the east, for there fell 120,000 men that drew the sword. So there's still a lot of them, but they've lost almost their whole army. And there's still 15,000 of them, and they're running from 300 men. In verse 11, Gideon went up by the way of them that dwelt in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbeha, and smote the host, for the host was secure. They were trapped. They ran, but they ran into a place where there was nowhere to go. And when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued after them, and took the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and discomfited all the host. Now before I go further, I'd want to point out to you, you see this transformation. And this is an important thing because this isn't just something magical that happens. This is a choice. A lot of times, and I've seen this happen again and again, I've had it happen to me, where you have an apparent victory, and then some victory has occurred, and then you have your next challenge. And there's always the temptation to say, oh no, not something else to deal with. But this isn't where Gideon's at now. Gideon didn't say, if I come again in peace. He said, when I come again in peace, I'll break down this tower. Something you got to understand when you've warred and when you've been through the struggle. God already took care of 120,000 men. They got 15,000 left. He'll do it again. The key is to keep obeying. We like to overcomplicate things and come up with all kinds of crazy prayer strategies and all this weird stuff that people get into when it's just obey God. Do what he told you to do. And a lot of times it's really something really simple, and you're going to be all right. Then you'll be able to say, when I come in peace again, not if. But again, that's a choice. You have to decide to continue to confide. Because even though they had the victory, they're tired now. They've been pursuing. And they tell you, chasing somebody while you're wearing armor is not an easy thing. I know what it is to run while wearing a flak jacket and a helmet and a 40-pound backpack carrying a rifle and ammunition. It's not easy. And I would imagine wearing the arms and armor of those days. It's probably heavy. You're tired, you're sweaty. You might be dehydrated. So even though they've had some victory so far, they're looking bad and they're feeling bad. And you have to be able to, you have to make that decision to continue to trust God. One second. Here's doing something odd here. Alright. But you have to continue to trust God. In verse 13 it says, Gideon the son of Joash returned from battle before the sun was up. Yeah, it looks like something happened with the window. I am recording this, so it will be on YouTube. So he came back before the sun was up. So they went there, and it says that they discomfited the host. Now, it's a very old word that we don't really use anymore. And usually we think that means to cause discomfort, which it can mean. But its appropriate usage is to embarrass or humiliate. So it wasn't a fight, it was a beating. It was a slaughter. That word is used at least back then, it was used to describe a battle where the battle goes really bad. It's just so lopsided that it's embarrassing. And they returned before the sun was up. That's fairly quick. Go deal with 15,000 men and all you got is 300. And it says they caught a young man of the men of Succoth and inquired of him. And he described to him the princes of Succoth and the elders thereof, even 70 men. And now we're going to see some consequences. Because, the people of Succoth are talking kind of slick. And, but now they're back. And it says, when he came to the men of Succoth, he says, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, with whom you did upbraid me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should get bread unto your men that are weary? And he took the elders of the city, and thorns of the wilderness, and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. And I have to tell you this, that there are times, and there will be times, that those who didn't help you, don't worry about, let it go. There's going to come a time when they're going to be taught, and the lesson they're going to be taught is going to be ugly. It's going to be painful. It's one of the New Testament differences. We don't have to go and do that. Don't have to go and teach them a lesson, so to speak, like Gideon did here. Like I said before, this is not the timid Gideon. And this isn't just anything. I mean, not only is this painful, not only is this physically rough and horrible, it's also embarrassing. These are the elders of the city. These are the leaders. These are the people everybody looks up to. These are the guys that if you want to do something in town, you got to go through them. You probably need their permission. These are the guys that call the shots. And they're getting beat with thorns and briars to teach them a lesson. So don't worry about the people that don't help you. Don't worry about the people that don't come alongside the vision. Don't worry about all those people who had a chance to help you and should have helped you. And God might have even told them to help you, but they didn't obey. Because their day is coming. And it's not a vindictive thing. We shouldn't really take pleasure in this. But their day will come. And I know people don't like anyone saying that, so that's not grace, that's not loving, it is loving. Because for anyone listening to this, if you're the kind of person who will sit on the sidelines and watch somebody struggle and watch somebody fight and watch them war and God told you to help and you didn't, this is a warning to you to change your ways. Repent of that tendency of always just wanting to be part of something that's already successful. Because you don't want to do the groundwork, because you don't want to be subject to the warfare, because you don't want to come under the vision of someone who you think is beneath you, because right now they're not much. Because otherwise your day's coming. People say, well, we're under the New Testament. This can't it? You really think so? Tell that to Judas. Tell that to Ananias and Sapphira. Tell that to Simon the sorcerer. There are consequences under the New Testament. Because what you have to understand, God has given someone a vision, and He's further told you to help them, or given you an assignment concerning them, or you're supposed to be involved in some way and you don't do it. You're not just impacting them, you're having a direct impact on everyone that they were supposed to serve, everyone they were supposed to minister, everyone that they were supposed to, whose life was supposed to be changed because of what they were doing. So there are consequences and repercussions to our negligence when we withhold good from them to whom it is due, when it is in the power of our hand to do it. We're not just affecting them. And I did a video last week where I was talking about how God's people are precious to Him. And the church is supposed to be precious to its leaders. And what you have to understand is when God sends you to help someone, when God gives you an assignment to assist in some way, or to pray, or to intercede, whatever it is, even just to encourage them, that person that God has given you an assignment concerning, that person's precious to God. And very often we don't think of it that way. We don't and it's part of a product of Western culture and the way we're taught to think. That we should only esteem somebody or respect someone or have any regard for them if they've already achieved something. Because even though Gideon and them did achieve something, the battle wasn't over. They didn't capture those kings yet. They still had 15,000 men left. Wasn't done yet. And very often you may very well encounter someone who's still in their warfare, still establishing their ministry, or still in some early stage of whatever it is God gave them to do. And they may not look like much. They may look tired. They may look hungry. They may look broke down. But if God gives you an assignment to be of some kind of help, you better do it. In verse 17 it says, He beat down the tower of Penuel and slew the men of the city. That seems harsh. But consider this. These people wouldn't feed his soldiers. So they had to go to that fight tired and hungry. And there's a big difference. If you know anything, if any of you have ever been a runner, anybody does distance running, the night before they do what's called carving up. They'll eat a whole lot of carbohydrates so they can fill up their muscles with glycogen that their body will use as an energy source for the duration of that run. If you don't do that the night before, you're not going to make it. And in a marathon, you sure won't make it. You need that energy supply. And you've been fighting all day, and you're about to go into another fight, you need some energy. By denying them help, they're potentially putting their lives in danger. I mean, they may as well have tried to kill them. And a lot of times we don't see it that way in our daily walk. And we don't see the seriousness and the potential repercussions of our negligence, or just our unwillingness to be of service. A lot of times people want to know what they need to do to do this in ministry, to do that in ministry. And a lot of people want to, they want to hear more in the prophetic and and be used in the prophetic as an example. That's because that's one of people like the prophetic, and they like the attention it gets them or whatever. Or some just genuinely want to be used by God. And what they don't realize and what they don't understand very often is that he reveals his secrets to his servants, the prophets. We like to focus on the secret part, not the servants. And if you really want to be trusted with a lot of secrets, make yourself useful. And I find myself saying that to people all the time. How have you made yourself useful? In the military, there's a phrase that's used in the intelligence community, and it's used in business too. And that phrase is need to know. I'll say this is on a need to know basis, and you don't need to know. This is a little past your pay grade. The degree to which you serve is the degree to which you're going to be in on secrets. Even the military understands that. There are secrets that a private will never hear. There are secrets that, and even the secrets that his commanding officer in his company, that the major knows all kinds of secrets, but he doesn't have the clearance that a general has. So on and so forth, up the chain of command. And at least ideally, the way it's supposed to work is that you move up in the ranks according to your service. In the natural world, it doesn't always work that way. There's politics involved, etc., etc. But in the kingdom of God, God is fair and just. And if you are faithful over little things, he makes you the ruler over many. He gives you more to do. He gives you more responsibility because you can handle it. And when you have been of service, he will start to reveal things to you. I remember years ago, and I didn't do this because I wanted to know secrets or anything. I just wanted to serve, and I knew that there was value in service. So I did things like I volunteered to, kind of regretted it later, but I volunteered to clean the church. So now I became the guy that, even though I lived 50 miles away, and I didn't have a car, I had to take the train, I was the guy that would get a call at, 9, 10 o'clock at night saying, Brother Sam, can you come clean the church? Because, they had a function there today, and they made a mess. And we need the church ready for service tomorrow morning. And I'm thinking, you couldn't have told me this 8 hours ago. And then I had to get on, walk to the train station 3 miles, and then get on the train, go to Trenton, walk halfway across town to go get the keys from the deacon who worked in the New Jersey State Capitol building. And then that was on the west side of town. Then I had to walk from there all the way back across town to the west side of town, about a good 45-minute walk to the church to clean the church. So by the time that's all done, it's probably about 2 o'clock in the morning. And but I served. And during those times of service, I spent sometimes taking hours to clean the church. I'd be praying, I'd be worshiping, and in time, it built my relationship with God. And God started to show me things. I started to know things, know people's struggles, know people's pain. And I began to pray for people and sometimes even fast for people. And so God started showing me things, not because I wasn't some guy just being nosy and wanted to know everybody's business. Because believe me, and I've said this to people, I try to mind my own business. I don't want to know people's business. But God is going to show you things when you can be trusted to be useful. Even if it's something like just cleaning the church. A lot of times it's not even big things. We want to do the big things. But as they say in the business world, if you're too big for the small things, you're too small for the big things. As one other guy likes to say, and it doesn't necessarily apply to everything, but there's some truth to it. How you do anything is how you do everything. And there's some truth to that. If we're sloppy in one area, we tend to be sloppy in other areas. And for some of us, there's some things we're not sloppy about. But what we are sloppy about says a lot about our character. And very often in the work of the ministry, in the things that we don't think a lot of, we don't put a lot of effort into it. And something I deliberately did when I cleaned the church, I try to be very detailed about it. I try to clean things that people normally wouldn't clean. Things that nobody was going to see, nobody was going to know or notice. The only person who was going to know was me and God. And maybe the brother in the church who liked to detail cars might notice because he had an eye for detail, but who knows? To this day, I don't know whether he ever noticed either. But can God trust you to be diligent? Can he trust you to serve? Because the more useful you are to the kingdom, it's not even that, and it's not about works, because some people will say, well, that's a works gospel. No, it's not. It's about diligence. And it's not just about diligence, but it's also that the experience of serving, even in small ways, is going to work on your character. It will prepare you for further responsibility. Because there were things that God revealed to me as I cleaned the church. There are things he taught me about holiness. There are things he taught me about sanctification. Things he taught me about prayer and the study of the word. Just the things like, cleaning under the sink in the bathrooms. Cleaning behind the toilets. Dusting under the chairs in the big fancy chairs in the pulpit area. And you'd be surprised the revelation you'll get while you're doing something like that. Because a lot of times it's not about the task itself, but it's about putting in the time. How valuable is the kingdom to you? How valuable and how precious are its people to you? Because I'll tell you right now, if you don't care a whole lot about his people, sure, you might have a gift, you might prophesy, you might have word and knowledge, and you'll see people like that, but you will not be trusted with the mysteries of the kingdom. Now, verse 18, he says, Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, What manner of men were they, who you slew at Tabor? And they said, As you are, so were they. Each one resembled the children of a king. And he said, They were my brethren, even the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. And then he said to Jethro's firstborn, Get up and slay them. But the youth did not draw his sword, for he feared because he was yet a youth. Another thing, a couple of things we got to understand here. Like I said before, don't worry about retribution. Gideon takes care of it here, but we don't have to. God will take care of it. I remember a very long time ago, I won't get into too much detail, but I visited a church. It was a church my sister went to. She was on the worship team, and I went and sat in the front row. There's nobody sitting there, so I go sit in the front row. That was where I sat in my church, so that's where I was going to go. Be where the action is, right? And the preacher's preaching, and it's good, man. He's really preaching up a storm. And I guess he didn't like my suit. I wore this really bright blue suit, the color of the Walmart sign, that kind of bright blue, with an equally bright red shirt and red snakeskin shoes. And I guess he didn't like it, and he had something real nasty to say to me about it in front of everybody. I won't say what he said, but it was really out there. And oddly enough, I didn't get offended. I actually smiled at him. Looked him right in the eye and I smiled at him. And I kept smiling at him for the rest of the service. And because at first I was surprised, like, no, he didn't. He did not just do that in front of his whole church. And I thought nothing of it. And about, goodness, 15 years later, because that was like in 1998 or 99, and 2014, decided to look him up on YouTube. Because, he could preach. He had some issues, some integrity issues, but he could preach. And I wanted to see what he was up to. And so I started watching some of his videos, and I started noticing he was doing this weird stuff. He had these strange tics that looked like he had Tourette's syndrome, where he'd move his arm would just swing behind his back, and he'd make this real weird noise with his nose, and he's just real twitching. He's doing this every a couple times a minute. It was disturbing to watch, and he's just bone thin. He looked like a skeleton. And I kept watching videos, and eventually he gained a little weight. And then I forget how many videos I watched till he finally said what had been going on. And he said that one day he got home after preaching, and he went to eat, and he couldn't swallow his food. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't swallow his food. He'd get all choked up. And for 14 years, he said, he could not eat solid food. That day, he had finally eaten some solid food for the first time in 14 years. And the video was from 2013. And so as he kept talking about what happened, and he still had this other stuff, this Tourette's looking thing going on, I did the math. His problem started apparently the day he did what he did. And I'm saying that to say this: you don't have to worry about retribution. God will deal with people. If he doesn't, accept it. If he does, now I don't take any pleasure in it. I felt pity for him. I prayed for him. I don't know if he's gotten better or not. Haven't caught up with him or anything. But apparently there were some consequences for what he did. Because what he did was nasty, and he was, I won't go into detail, but he was trying to act deep and act like he was saying something that was from God, and it was not. Dangerous thing to do. So don't worry about bringing the consequences on people. God will do it if he sees fit. If he doesn't, then fine. And when I tell that story, some people say, "Did you forgive him?" I wasn't even offended to begin with. I was surprised, but I wasn't offended. I was a little bit amused actually, because no, he didn't. So for me, there was nothing to forgive. I wasn't offended. And now there have been things over the years where I did get offended because people did some real bad dirt. And when that happens, you still got to understand God's going to take care of it. And don't be looking forward to revenge or God avenging it. Just let it go. Let God deal with it if he feels like dealing with it. But sure enough, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. And by the same token, please be careful how you handle people. Some of the most presumptuous sins that we commit in the work of the ministry is in how we deal with people, how we treat people. Especially those that we don't think much of. Especially the ones who don't seem to be anybody or anything. And most of us are guilty of it. Where we've treated people poorly, or we've just been dismissive, or we just had no regard for what they had to say or for their person. And we very quickly forget that this is someone for whom Christ died. That even if they don't look like much, even if they don't seem to have much, and maybe they won't ever be much, that is still someone that God in his infinite wisdom said, this person is worth my son's blood. So how do we dare not value anyone in the kingdom? And we have to understand, like I said, God's going to take care of it. Just like Gideon did here. And something also we got to understand is there are times when we got to deal with the situation, not in terms of taking revenge, but sometimes there has to be a confrontation. Sometimes somebody does something and we got to call them on it. And one of the regrettable things that I've seen, and I've seen it in churches, and I've seen it in even in Facebook groups where people do this, where they get somebody to they send somebody to do their dirty work, so to speak. If there's something they don't really feel like doing, they send somebody else to go deliver the message. And just like Gideon did here, we told his firstborn to kill them, and he was scared to do it because he was young. And even though it's a good management practice not to delegate, and there are things you will delegate if you are in leadership, there's some things that require personal touch, some things you got to do yourself. One of the responsibilities of victory, and one of the responsibilities of continuing victory, is that there may very well be tasks and assignments and warfare that is unpleasant that you're going to have to do yourself. Everything isn't for you to give it to the intercessors and let them take care of it. A lot of ministries like to do that. There's a situation, pastor hands it off to intercessors, and he ain't prayed about it at all. He ain't. He hasn't. But you know what I mean. You can't delegate everything. And the more serious it is, the more likely it is that you can't delegate. Especially if you want to be in leadership. You want to lead God's people. You're going to have to take some responsibility. Verse 21, then said Zebah and Zalmunna, arise and fall on us, for as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and took away the ornaments that were on their camels' necks. Another thing I'd like you to understand, particularly with regard to what we like to call spiritual warfare, I'd rather apply it to personal sanctification, is look to the details. Look to the details. Because he didn't just kill them, he also took the ornaments that were on their camels. Be thorough. I used to know a preacher used to preach a message called Detailed Holiness. Because very often we're good at dealing with, we like to deal with the big picture stuff, and these little issues, or ones that seem little, we don't deal with them. Or we think, oh, that's a side issue. No, this is part of the picture. Deal with all of it. In verse 22, says that the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son's son also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Something else we have to understand about being an agent of victory, an agent of deliverance. If you're in the position of being a deliverer to people, you have to take care to make sure that you don't become a ruler. Because a lot of times people will try to ascribe to us more influence that really shouldn't be ours. Over the past year, since I started ministering to people on Facebook and elsewhere on social media, people approach me saying, I'd like you to be my spiritual father, or, I want you to mentor me or whatever. And I have turned down almost all of them because God didn't tell me to rule over you. I don't want to rule over you. I want the Lord to rule in your life. I want to equip you. I do want to help you get to a place of maturity so that you can do what God called you to do, unhindered and unfettered. I want you to come into the fullness of who God intended you to be. But I don't need to rule over you to do that. Because I've seen too much of this in the church where people turn mentorship into this, not even so much a lifelong thing, but they turn it into a control thing. And they talk about covering, and they create these networks that basically amount to pyramid schemes, where rather than their spiritual son, you become their downline in what amounts to a multi-level marketing racket. And the kingdom was never supposed to look like that. I want to equip you, not control you. And Gideon at least understood that he didn't need to rule over them. And there may be people that God brings into your life, that you are an agent of deliverance. You may be an agent of healing. You might mentor them for a while. You might teach them and train them. But it may not be for you to have this lifelong authority relationship with them. Particularly if you are called to any kind of leadership. You have to learn not to be attached to authority. Because one of the biggest problems that we have in church leadership is that we're more fascinated by our authority over people than our commitment to serve them. And then we wonder why we can't lead anybody anywhere. It's a big difference between leading and controlling. And a lot of times the truth is, and most of us have been guilty on this point, most of us at least who have served in leadership, we've done a lot more controlling than we've done leading. Usually for selfish reasons. Verse 24, and Gideon said to them, I would desire a request of you, that you give me every man the earrings of his prey. For they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, we will willingly give them. And they spread a garment, and they did throw therein every man the earrings of his prey. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. Beside ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and beside the chains that were about their camels' necks. So just the earrings were 1,700 shekels of gold. Shekel, I believe, is somewhere around 10 ounces. So looking at 17,000 ounces of gold. Current price of gold is about $1,200. You do the math. This was worth a lot of money. This was, goodness. Wow, yeah, it's worth a lot. More than 200 million. So it's quite a bit of spoils. And Gideon made an ephod thereof, and put it in his city, even in Ophrah. And all Israel went there, whoring after it. This thing became a snare to Gideon and to his house. So Gideon did the right thing in telling them he didn't want to be a ruler over them, but then he makes his ephod out of this, and people start idolizing it. And so something we got to really be careful with is not allowing not turning our victories into a monument. And we've seen a lot of ministries do that, where it becomes idolatry, where people develop this fascination, or this admiration of this, that, and the other thing that this person did, or that word was so accurate, or this miracle happened, that miracle happened, and we forget that it's supposed to be about God and not about the man of God. I remember years ago, I'd said it in a church, and this didn't make me any friends, but I said, in prophetic ministries, God is really important. He's almost as important as the prophet. And I said that because I saw this tendency where the prophet had become so important. It's like you guys are more fascinated with the prophet than you are with God. And this shouldn't be. And a lot of times it's because of the Western religious model that we live in has some tendencies in that direction. Because let's face it, you turn on any kind of Christian programming, most of the time you will see on the screen or hear the name of the preacher or the name of his ministry 7 to 10 times more than you'll hear the name of Jesus or of God. I remember meeting a man one time with my wife. We'd come out of this place and ran into this guy, and we started talking. And in about 6 or 7 seconds, I think in two sentences, this man mentioned his pastor's name 6 times. How he did that, I marvel at it. 6 times. And in our whole conversation, the word God never came out of his mouth, and the name of Jesus never left his lips. But he couldn't stop talking about his bishop. And when this first happened, I found fault with him. And surely he had his responsibility in that, because he made an idol out of the preacher. But the truth is, there's more fault with the preacher, because the preacher made it happen. And having encountered that preacher, I know that the preacher deliberately wanted that to happen, because it was good for his profitability. Particularly if we're called to leadership. You got a vision for ministry. God's called you to preach the gospel, to minister in prophecy or the word of knowledge, or in some way, shape, or form have some kind of leadership function. Do everything you need to do to make sure that neither you nor your ministering become an idol to God's people. I've sometimes had people, because I've done a lot of prophesying on Facebook, they approach me in a certain kind of way, and I say, look, I'm just a man. I'm just one messed up guy. Just somebody God sees fit to use. So I appreciate that you like me, but don't be so fascinated. Because if not for the grace of God, who knows what I would have been. We won't even go there, but it wouldn't be pretty. So in verse 28 it says, so was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so they lifted up their heads no more. And that's something. A deliverance that lasts, a deliverance that is where it doesn't lift its head up anymore. I long to see that among God's people. Because I've seen too many things. I remember, people would come in off the street, they get free from drugs, and then 6 months later they're back out on drugs. And the truth is, abstinence is not deliverance. And very often, we haven't seen deliverance. A lot of times people have not experienced real deliverance. They experience conviction, and then they engage in abstinence, but they don't really get delivered. Because when you're really free, it doesn't raise up its head anymore. There may be things that come to attack. There may be things, and you for sure got the victory. You can keep that thing away. And it says, and the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. This is a lasting deliverance. And it says, and Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, that's Gideon, went and dwelt in his own house. So after all this, he went home. He didn't try to become a king or any kind of political fancy boy. He just went home and minded his own business. Even though he did the wrong thing with the ephod. And it says, and Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bore him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. And Gideon the son of Joash died in a good old age, and was buried in the sepulchre of Joash's father, in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And it came to pass, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again, and went whoring after Baalim, and made Baal-berith their god. And the children of Israel remembered not the Lord their God, who had delivered them out of the hands of all their enemies on every side. Neither did they show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, according to all the goodness which he had showed unto Israel. Another thing we have to realize is that a lot of times when people, and it's not even just when a deliverer dies. Sometimes when just the deliverer goes away, and they no longer have that person's influence, they go right back to idolatry. And you see the same thing among the saints. A lot of us don't grow to the point where we don't behave unless there's somebody watching us, so to speak. And in some cases, almost literally. Out of sight, out of mind. And I know one individual who God used them powerfully in their family as a deliverer. There was a family member who had autism. And they didn't tell the guy this. They just gave him the little kid to pray for. And he prayed for him. He perceived that there was a demon there, and he cast it out. Because the kid was 2 years old and wouldn't speak a word. He would just grunt at people, and he would act really weird. At first they thought he was deaf or that he was mute, but they had his vocal cords checked. There's nothing wrong with the kid. Well, clearly a spiritual problem. And it turned out he was autistic. And so he cast the devil out, and the kid got free. And there was another child in the family that also had some issues with demons. Cast the devil out of that one. And there were all kinds of different deliverance that went on in the family because of this particular individual. Well, eventually, once they got everything they think they needed to get through this guy, they ostracized him from the family. Had no more contact with him. And lo and behold, years later, there's all kinds of bondage in that family. They're the ones who were little children then. They're now young adults, and one of the ones that had demons cast out of them is now believes in the validity of perversion and transgenderism. They were raised in church, raised Pentecostal. Because once the influence of that deliverer was gone, they all went back to their usual tricks. And this is something we have to be emotionally prepared for, because a lot of times especially when you really care about God's people, it can get to you and it'll grieve you, and it's right for it to grieve you. If it doesn't grieve you, that's a scary thing. But you have to be prepared for it to happen, because sometimes it does. And we also have to understand that after all that, they may very well not show you any kindness. And believe me, I can tell you that from personal experience. People throughout my life that come to me for prayer because they really need an answer from God. They get their answer and they're back to just acting the fool toward me. People aren't always going to be grateful. They may not always value you. They'll value the deliverance they got, but a lot of times, and again, it's part of Western culture, where in Western culture we are basically taught that it's okay to use each other. And usually we'll think it's okay if we're going to make it mutual. We're both going to be using each other, but now we're not givers. We're just users and takers. We're just mutually taking from each other so that it balances out, or we think it balances out, or in most cases we think we got a better deal than the other guy. And because that is how Western culture teaches people to think and teaches people how to relate to each other, very often the almost inevitable result of that in many cases is you will have people who they may come to you for deliverance. They may come to you for a prophetic word. They may get a miracle from God through you, and then turn around and treat you like garbage. And you got to be prepared for that. And it's kind of like with evangelism. The result is not your responsibility. And their reaction and their gratitude or lack thereof is also not your responsibility. But understand that in the end, God's will be done. Just make sure you did it. And just make sure you obeyed. Because a lot of times you're just going to have to let it go and not, and it's not always easy. Sometimes it may be hard, sometimes it may be hurtful. It's part of the walk. It's part of the walk. But, I'll put it like this, at least you don't got to hang on a cross. So it's not quite so bad. But if we look at this account of Gideon, and we're going to understand that victory and continuing victory comes with responsibilities, comes with some obligations, it comes with some consequences. But in the end, God will make it worth your while. God bless you, and God keep you.